One for Mum, one for Dad, and one for the country.
And there has never been a more exciting time to be an Australian.
Budgets are about choices, Fran, and you show what you value through the choices you make.
Dead, buried, cremated.
This is coal. Don't be afraid. Don't be scared. Won't hurt.
Australia's basically done for. We'll just end up being a third-rate economy. You know, a banana republic.
How good is Australia?
Just follow the money.
G'day, and welcome to Follow the Money, the Australia Institute's podcast demystifying the big economic issues in Australia and putting them in plain English. I'm Ebony Bennett, and I'm Deputy Director at the Australia Institute, and I want to welcome you to our summer series, where we're bringing you conversations from our webinars this year. This episode, you'll hear from Saul Griffith, a clean tech entrepreneur and founder and Chief Scientist of Otherlab, in conversation with the Victorian Minister for Energy, the Environment and Climate Change and the Minister for Solar Homes, Lily D'Ambrosio. This episode was recorded live on the 6th of October 2021, and things may have changed since recording.
Very pleased to introduce you to Ben Oquist, the Executive Director of the Australia Institute, Saul Griffith, the founder of Rewiring Australia, which is a blueprint for an entire clean energy economy in Australia that will lower bills, create millions of jobs and meet climate goals. And of course, the Honourable Lily D'Ambrosio, Victorian Minister for Energy, Environment and Climate Change, and of course, our very own Richie Merzian, Director of the Australia Institute's Climate and Energy Program. Ben, if I could hand over to you now to say a few words before we get started on the discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Ebony, and thank you, Saul, and thank you, Minister D'Ambrosio. Also, thanks to the Climate and Energy team at the Australia Institute who have helped put this event together and help drive the report that Saul is releasing today, in particular Program Director Richie Merzian and our Energy and Policy and Regulatory Lead Dan Cass. An amazing effort to help get us here today. Saul, your intervention is so needed. To act, we're told, on climate change is to sacrifice. Indeed, 2 years after that really damaging report by Brian Fisher that warned of economic decline, lower wages, higher unemployment, cumulative GNP losses that was waved around all over the media by sections of our political class, we're still dealing with the consequences of a really misleading and devastatingly bad report. But your work, Saul, indeed Minister D'Ambrosio's work shows the exact alternative of opportunity, of solutions and savings. Acting on climate change can bring economic prosperity for the country and for households. So it's a great delight to be introducing what is an achievable and, importantly, equitable roadmap for dramatically cutting Australia's emissions using the proven technologies available to every one of us right now: electric cars, kitchen ranges, water heaters, heating systems. By 2030, Australia's households could be saving $65 billion a year, which is the equivalent to our export earnings from coal. And the good news is the appetite from voters is there. Our big 2021 Climate of the Nation report polling is out next week, and it indicates huge support for the federal government to be doing more to increase EV uptake in Australia. It shows Australians want to electrify household appliances with the right government incentives. And of course, best place to present this roadmap for rapid decarbonisation is the man behind Rewiring Australia, Saul Griffith. I'd like to thank Saul for your great work for being here today. I hope you all caught 7:30 last night, featuring the launch of Saul's report, a great insight into what's at stake, but also to Lily D'Ambrosio, the Victorian Minister for Energy, Environment and Climate Change. Lily, your leadership is so needed, not just for Victoria, but nationally. And we're delighted to be able to bring your vision and ideas to a national audience here today with Saul. As Ebony said, Matt Keane's not with us for obvious reasons today. He was unable to join us, but his ideas about Saul and his views about it are well known and reported in the paper on the weekend, so dive into that if you can. The policies and active implementation of those policies we are seeing in New South Wales and Victoria to make the switch to an electric future is really encouraging in an era where we often hear how dispiriting the politics of climate change can be. Real leadership being shown in New South Wales and Victoria shows what can be done. And it's a great meeting of minds, if you like, to have Minister D'Ambrosio and Saul Griffith with us today. Last of all, Ebony, thanks to you for hosting us today, and thanks to all of our audience for your continued interest and support in the work we do and these webinars. You're the reason why we're here today. And Saul and Lily's work, as important as it is, can't be taken forward without community support and engagement. And thank you to everybody who's tuned in, not just to today, but the series in general, allowing the community to be part of these important political and policy debates. Take it away, Saul. Thank you very much.
Terrific. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Ebony. Thank you, Lily. Thank you, everyone out there, for dialing in today. I'm going to go to sharing my screen. Hopefully someone can tell me that it's working correctly.
Yep, we can see
There
that.
we go. So my name's Saul Griffith, and we're launching not only a report on what Australian households have to save today, but a new organisation, Rewiring Australia, which is going to hopefully persist in advocating for very rapid action on climate change and trying to tell the positive narratives of what is possible. So it's the stories of what we have to win as opposed to the stories of what we have to lose. I'm actually dialing in from San Francisco today, back in America, to launch a book called Electrify, which launches with MIT Press next Tuesday, in fact. So that explains my absence. Normally I live actually in a very traditional coal mining town in Austin Mere, just on the outskirts of Wollongong in New South Wales. The work that we did today has its origins in a curious hobby that I have, which is energy data, which I've been studying for about 20 years to understand what is behind what we know or what we think we know about energy. In 2018, that became a contract that I did with the Department of Energy. And the map that you see before you that looks like a bowl of spaghetti is in fact tracing all of the energy flow through the US economy in enormous detail, right down to how much energy is used on school buses, how much energy is used in refrigerators in commercial buildings, etc. And it's this level of insight that enables you to really sort of think through what a whole economy climate solution looks like. That work has led to us starting another organization called Rewiring America, which has been actually working with the White House and with the Senate on writing the American $3.5 trillion bill on climate. And so I can also compare the Australian experience to that front row seat in the US. But to bring it to Australia, it was that work in the US that led me to realize that Australia gets to go first in the good news stories. So let's get to the good news story for Australia. Just for quick context, this is the Australian emissions. We obviously export a huge amount of fossil fuels. That's up top. That doesn't count on us. But our domestic economy is divided roughly into the energy we use at home within Australia and the energy we use in our industry to create the exports that we export. So if we just look at that domestic economy, the energy that we use in our own economy, about 42% of that of those emissions come from decisions we make in the household, and another 30% in commercial buildings. And today we're talking about those 40% emissions that come from the household, which are something we can really eliminate this decade. And rather than, the reason we went to at length to separate out the domestic economy from the export economy, to be quite honest, the answers there for the export economy aren't quite there, but we are in paralysis of inaction, waiting for a whole economy answer, whereas this lets us focus on the mind on what works right now while we develop the technologies for green steel over the next decade. So let's talk about this. So those 40% of emissions are decisions that we make around our kitchen tables. What fuel's in our cars, what heat is in our homes, where does the electricity come from, and how are the fuels made. And it's consequential for the average Australian home. So the average household has around $80,000 a year in expenditures, and close to $4,800 of that is on energy. So We spend, $2,500 on petrol or diesel in the average house, about $620 on natural gas in the average house. We spend more on electricity than meat, about $1,700. And so you can see that it's consequential, these payments for the Australian household. What we did in the study, this is really the giant summary of the good news story. So $0 is just baselining it at what happened last year. So we're looking relative to where we were, what happens if you electrify everything in the household. So what does that really mean? There's about 1.7 cars in the average Australian household. So we go through the math of paying for and electrifying both of those. We electrify the water heating systems. We electrify the space heating systems. We electrify the cooking and kitchen systems. And then we provide enough solar on the roof and enough battery backup to make sure that that's 24/7 electricity for the whole year. Indeed, if you bought that bundle of goodies in 2022, the average Australian house would be paying about $5,000 more per year than they would in their current energy expenditures. But you can see that we're on this very rapid curve down here. And that's because battery packs are about $1,200 a kilowatt hour today, but they're going to get to $200 a kilowatt hour by 2025. Similarly, Bloomberg New Energy Finance is showing that electric vehicles will be cheaper than the petrol vehicles in the showroom in 2025, 2026. So all of those cost curves are good news. And you can actually see 2024, 2025 will be the year where we start to save up to $1,000 a year per household. And by 2030, if we really hit the gas, the average household in Australia will be saving $5,500 compared to what they spend today for driving their vehicles and heating, cooling, and powering their homes. That actually translates to huge savings for the economy. You can see there's a little gray line there. So we assume that we're going to slowly ramp up in the next 5 years to try and get a quarter of households done. That'll be an investment because the economics don't quite work yet. That'll be a few $1 billion a year of investments. But then once we get to about 2026, the economy starts to save huge amounts of money. And by 2030, close to $40 billion a year across all of our households. So we really, if Team Australia was thinking about climate change as an opportunity to invest, this is the best investment we could make. And that is summarized in the last picture I'll show you in this slide here. For a sum of about $12 billion investment over the next 5 years, and then continuing to hit the throttle to try and electrify all homes and all vehicles by 2030. We are absolutely raking in the savings by the end of this decade. And in fact, persisting at saving $40+ billion a year on from there. So that's the giant opportunity for Australia. And I think is an opportunity that we should take. What I would love to see is I think we have the opportunity for leadership in Glasgow. This is a point I'd really like to make. I have the privilege of working with both European governments, the American government, and in conversations with the Australian government. What we're seeing in climate globally is the more ambition any country shows, it gives more space and opportunity for other countries to have ambition. Australia has the best version of this story in the world. That's because, well, actually, I'll express it this way. When I'm talking to the American government, I say, if a country could exist that had Australia's solar policy, California's electric vehicle policy, and South Korean building heating policy, you'd have the perfect country that's solving climate change on schedule. So the Australian solar miracle is one of the pillars, and we need to do the same thing now for our building heating systems and for our electric vehicle systems. And if we did that aggressively, we could actually believably go to Glasgow and say, world, I'm sorry, we haven't been great yet, but in the next decade, we're going to electrify our domestic economy. That'll eliminate at least a third of our domestic emissions. And in the decade that follows, we will electrify our industry and our exports, and we'll give you the green steel and the green aluminum and the green metals that will enable your economies to decarbonize by 2040. That would be an Australia, I think, that we would all be proud of.
Lily, Minister D'Ambrosio, I'll come to you next. We've obviously seen an amazing vision outlined there, and a much more positive one than we normally hear about when it comes to climate policy. I just wonder if we could get your response to that vision that Saul's outlined there.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm really excited to be here. And can I acknowledge Saul and the fantastic splash that this has made in the last few days to culminate in this terrific event here this morning. And also, of course, I need to and I want to pay my respects to the Wurundjeri people. And they are the people, the owners of the lands on which I'm situated here in Victoria. My respects go to all elders, past, present and emerging, and any other traditional owners who have joined with us here today. The rewiring work, as Saul has labelled it, is a very exciting one, but it absolutely speaks volumes to the opportunities that we've got in front of us to decarbonise our economy. And if you have a look at Victoria's experience over the last 6 years, we've had incredible success in delivering new renewable energy projects, for example, going from 10% of our generation at the end of 2014 to around 30% earlier this year. And we've also, of course, shown that you can reduce emissions with great ambition while growing our economy. So if we have a think about that, we're delivering 44% of economic growth while cutting our emissions by 25%. All of that since 2014. But it's also been a very democratic way of doing it, involving communities, having communities come with us. That's the social licence that is so critical to a successful transition. The decarbonisation journey has to be a democratic one, one that is embraced by communities and be able to demonstrate and deliver on real benefits for them that they can feel and touch and enjoy at a household level or a business level, but of course right across our community. We've shown that with renewables, you can create thousands of jobs. So our 50% renewable energy target by 2030 will see more than 25,000 jobs created. And we've also shown that by clean energy, clean power, you can slash power costs. So in Victoria, we've seen bills declining. This is household bills declining by more than 10% over the last 12 months alone. So none of this happens by accident. We know that. And it does require ambition. It requires ambition and a range of policies that support renewables. For example, in Victoria, we've had the biggest reverse auction in the country for getting new renewable energy projects built. We've got the Solar Homes program, $1.3 billion, which will, by the end of 2030, will have delivered more than 770,000 rebates to Victorians to either take up solar panels on their roof or battery storage in their homes or solar hot water systems. And that's just an extraordinary amount of money. We're also putting a lot of money, of course, into upgrading the distribution system and the transmission system. So as a result of all of that, we're decarbonising our economy at the most rapid rate of any of the state jurisdictions in the country. And we know, of course, that sheer urgency of climate change means that we can't rest on that. We certainly head towards COP in Glasgow. There's got to be a lot more focus on whether we as a country are finally ready to sign up to net zero. But really, Victoria answered that question 5 years ago, and many leading jurisdictions answered that question 5 years ago. Today, we have to answer a different question, and that question is, what do we do between now and 2030? That's the question. And certainly in Victoria, we will be halving our carbon emissions by 2030. That is a big commitment from us. It's an ambitious one, but it's one that we know we can do. And that is about making our society fairer and taking communities with us. And this is the recipe, if you like, of getting it right. And this is where hope comes in. Hope is absolutely a bottom line for us. It has to be if we're going to take communities with us and actually meet the challenge of what we've got to do. A lot of that will come through electrification. Certainly hydrogen is going to play a role, energy efficiency, but we know that electrification will be the single most important feature of the change and the transformation to decarbonise between now and 2030. There's a lot of investments that we've put in. As I said, this is about that democratisation piece. So we've got the biggest energy efficiency package of any state for households. That's $335 million, and that'll mean that we'll be able to replace 250,000 old heating systems from people's homes with high energy efficient electric heating and cooling systems, split cycle systems, reverse cycle split systems. So this will be about swapping out old gas heaters, old low efficiency electric heaters, wood heaters, and this is about really turbocharging that electrification agenda. And that'll slash people's power bills, absolutely, but it'll also keep them warm in winter and cool in the summer. And this is about people's health too. When we think about climate change and resilience, it's also about keeping people safe and healthy. And it will have a huge impact on people's power bills, doing it well, targeting those that are most in need of it. We're also going to be upgrading through energy efficiency 35,000 solar housing properties, again, cutting bills while making Victoria fairer. Again, it's that democratisation of the decarbonisation journey, which really goes squarely to Saul's key evidence, and that is you can decarbonise. Electrification is a key way of doing that, and you can actually make significant savings for people. So what about the next big challenges and opportunities for rewiring Victoria for 2030 or by 2030? More Victorian households use gas for space heating, cooking and hot water than anywhere else in Australia. And Victoria accounts for 35% of domestic gas use in the East Coast gas market. And most of our residential gas use, 74%, is for space heating our homes. Now, these facts are historical given the Bass Strait gas fields and Victoria's cold winters. And that's why we are working on developing a gas substitution roadmap. That's the first, we'll be the first state in the country to develop that roadmap, and it'll position Victoria as the country's leader in gas substitution, showing how we will shift more appliances to electricity, improve energy efficiency, reducing fugitive emissions, and increase the uptake of renewable hydrogen, biomethane, and other sustainable emerging technologies. Now, similar to Saul's findings, our modelling for the roadmap shows that electrification is not just vital, but will do the heavy lifting to halve Victoria's emissions by 2030. And that's why we need to keep building on the household package we released last year, harnessing our incredible solar resource and driving down our household bills. So we're also recently released our ZEV roadmap, and that's why we, as an initial investment, investing $100 million to reduce emissions in vehicles, and that includes a combination of subsidies for ZEV purchases, commitment to 50% of new light vehicles being ZEVs, light vehicle sales being ZEVs by 2030, and that all new buses will be zero emissions from 2025. Renewable hydrogen will play a key role in that, and we've mapped out that vision in the Renewable Hydrogen Industry Development Plan, also investing $108 million for clean energy technologies, including renewable hydrogen, to get us on track there. So the Rewiring Australia is very much alive as a Rewiring Victoria template, if you like, and we know that this will be a really key strategy for achieving what are significant, ambitious emissions reductions, but at the same time ensuring that Victorians, that households, businesses can actually gain the benefits, feel them, touch them, having tangible outcomes for them in their control. And I really do want to congratulate the Australia Institute for putting together this really important event, and very happy to join the panel for questions and answers later.
Thank you so much, Minister. I can see we've got close to 1,100 people on the webinar with us today. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your interest in, what is such a positive story, one that we too rarely get when it comes to climate policy in Australia. So just to quickly recap, as we've just heard, we've got a blueprint for Rewiring Australia that Saul laid out. We will try and send links to that, if not an email around to everyone who has attended today, with links to all of the information that we've spoken about today. But Saul, I want to come back to you. This is obviously a really big and powerful vision for Australia, and it's really exciting to hear that you're doing a similar similar work with the Biden administration in the United States. But I wonder if you can just take us through what these next steps look like for Australia if we're going to implement this vision.
Like I said, Australia is further along than the rest of the world, and we stand to win more, and we stand to win sooner. And Lily just outlined all of the fantastic programs in Victoria. You could indeed piece together, if you took the best of the policies that are in the ACT and New South Wales and Queensland's demand response policies and experiments in microgrids in Western Australia and what's happening in South Australia and all of the things that are happening in Victoria, you have about 90% of what you need for a federal policy that looks like a very strong game plan on climate. So I congratulate all of the states for doing their work. We still need a little bit of federal glue to hold it all together. With the national, the electricity markets need to change the rules so that we ensure that the rules of the road of the electricity grid and distribution grids of the future are free and equal for all participants, so that each household can stand and benefit from their storage and generation assets as much as a utility or a generator can. And then very critically and absolutely doubling down on this is only going to work as a transition if it is fair and just. And this just comes from the basic math. If only half of the households can afford to solve climate change, we don't solve climate change. And for the top half, they will be able to afford it and afford it quite soon because of all of these, the prices are dropping and we're getting sensible rebate programs in. But the capital cost up front of getting into these things is going to be more difficult for low-income houses. And if we wait for everyone to, buy an electric vehicle on the second-hand market 15 or 20 years from now, we're going to miss the climate goals that we really need to hit. So I think it's really critical that we have federal finance programs that help the states in making sure that we bring all families along. And for that reason, and we're doing this in the US, but also doing it in Australia, I think it's really important to understand the very changing nature of what we mean when we say infrastructure. Right? In the 20th century, infrastructure was our transmission lines and our snowy projects and our coal mines, and they provided wonderful, reliable electricity and energy for the 20th century. But we already know the balance is going to shift. There's going to be a lot more distributed assets. It's going to, Australia could power nearly all of its electrification needs on its rooftops of commercial and residential buildings. There's going to be a lot more storage assets. The largest battery in Australia won't be any of the big batteries. It won't be this Snowy 2.0. It'll be the collective battery that is all of our electric vehicles connected to the grid. And if we start to then understand that our heating systems, my heating system will charge your car one day, your car will cook my meals one day, battery on the side of my house will help my neighbor sometimes. It really is a genuine piece of national infrastructure that we're going to have in our homes. And so I think we need to come up with the new financing schemes that truly enable that. And quite honestly, even that should feel familiar in the sense that the Australian governments forever have had very proactive policies to help people get into home ownership, which is the ultimate piece of infrastructure in an individual's life. So I'm optimistic that if we get, we write the right rules and we prioritize the benefits and the savings going to the households, that the banks are ready to play and come and help with. And I think we can do this. And I really do congratulate the states for putting together the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle that, no one's done it. I think it's accurate to say no one's done this in one location in the world, the whole picture yet. And so I would actually like to see a race between the states to see who can get there first and who can run the biggest at-scale pilot in a real community. That would be a tremendous outcome.
Well, that might take me back to you, Minister D'Ambrosio. You've outlined a whole range of really exciting projects happening in Victoria to reduce emissions, including that gas substitution roadmap, which sounds really important. But how possible is it for Victoria to electrify everything? And would you consider a pilot version of what Saul's talking about here?
Well, look, we certainly have a lot of the key elements of the pilot, as Saul described it earlier. So we're certainly looking for more ways of meeting our very ambitious targets. In terms of the elements of the electrification work, certainly gas substitution is a critical one. It absolutely is. But, making it accessible to people, making it real and tangible is critical to this. And that is why we've just got to keep at what are the ways of actually making this accessible to people. So if you have a look at our Solar Homes program, we're supporting more than 770,000 Victorians to either get solar panels or a battery on their roof. And we've tailored it so it's not the top end of the wage earners or the salary earners. It's people earning, less than 180,000 a year combined household. When you have a look at the statistics, most people who are taking up the offer are the ones who are earning $100,000 or less. And the reason for that is that, they're basically able to get a rebate at virtually no upfront cost. So from day one, they've got that panel on their roof. And then when you then talk about achieving targets such as halving our emissions by 2030, people can actually understand because they relate it to their own efforts and their own benefits, if you like. So they can see that duality there of an ambition, the need to decarbonise, but when they've done it themselves, it's actually helped save them a lot of money off their bills. So that effort, we're absolutely determined, and we will get to that halving of our emissions by 2030, absolutely will.
Richie, I might come to you now. We've obviously heard what Victoria, but also a lot of the other states are really streets ahead of the federal government when it comes to setting strong and clear targets by 2030. Matt Keane is obviously unavailable to be here today, but he's just announced a more ambitious 2030 target for New South Wales and things like renewable energy zones. The key ingredient that seems to be missing here is the federal government. We're on the road to Glasgow. What needs to be happening federally to get us on track for the type of vision that Saul's outlined?
Well, yeah, I guess it starts with that level of ambition. With Glasgow, less than a month away now, the entire purpose and political significance of Glasgow is that it is, in a sense, the 5-year anniversary of the Paris Agreement. It is the occasion to ratchet up action, and it's focused almost entirely on short term. So that is basically increasing that 2030 target, which is something that, unfortunately, the federal government hasn't done. It has the same 26 to 28% emission reduction target by 2030 from a 2005 baseline, whereas Victoria has a halving, New South Wales has a halving, and some states or territories like the ACT are going even further. So really, this all starts with the federal government taking on a strong short-term ambition, because that will then require actually electrifying households, given they form such a large part of our national emissions footprint. Right now, these conversations are in the early stages with the federal government, but there's no reason why they couldn't move forward with a pilot, taking an existing brownfield site and actually just electrifying it completely and showing that it can be done. That would be the next step. It would be an easy way to introduce the federal government to this concept, and certainly bring on board their support. So that's something that we'd love to see going forward.
Saul, I might come back to you and then we might start going to some questions from the audience there. Just a reminder, you can type those questions into the Q&A box there for our panel. This is all a really great vision for a lot of clean energy infrastructure. But the other element, I guess, I just wanted to touch on is fossil fuels. Obviously, it looked like to me around about half of our emissions there in your Super Sankey map are exported and don't necessarily count towards Australia's Paris target, for example, but we're nevertheless a massive exporter of fossil fuels. How much do we have to discuss what's happening with Australia's fossil fuels, and should we be considering, I guess, a halt to new fossil fuel projects in line with the IEA pathway? If we're going to make all of this other stuff happen, does it make any difference if we're still exporting all of those fossil fuels?
I think there's a lot of things. There were about 8 questions in your question there about fossil fuels. Let's just say something that's a bit uncomfortable. We celebrate our exports in fossil fuels, but we don't recognise that the profit margin we make on all of the export of all of our coal and all of our natural gas probably doesn't even pay for the oil and petrol and diesel we import. So it's not even, if you want to know what the net zero for the Australian economy is, it's digging up all those fossil fuels to just not even break even. So I think that's just to say, I think it's less important than we've allowed ourselves to think. Absolutely, we have to eliminate fossil fuel emissions by mid-century. I think we should all, the sobering reality is, and you mentioned the IEA report and the IPCC both lean too heavily on very, very heavy amounts of negative emissions by mid-century. In fact, in the two best scenarios of the IPCC AR6 report, that's the most recent one, they're requiring 10 gigatons or more of negative emissions by 2060. That is an equivalent amount of putting carbon dioxide into the earth that we currently have in tons of fossil fuels coming out of the earth. It's very, very, very unlikely. That reality means, and I was watching the chat, there's some people saying, is this urgent enough? Net zero 2050 isn't really urgent enough. We need to look very closely at these exports and exported emissions that we have. To be honest, though, I think 20, 30 years is a lot longer than people mention. And to bring it back to the conversation about the households, people buy cars once every 10 or 15 years. People buy the heating system to their home once every 10 or 15 years. The average water heater lasts about 12 years. So these are decisions that are made every 10 or 12 years. The cadence with which we need to move as a planet now is that at every time we're replacing one of those machines, it needs to be the clean electric equivalent. So we're not going to turn it off tomorrow. We're not going to turn exports off tomorrow. If we do a very good job, it'll take about 20 years. That's one generation of one workforce. So we have more, it just means you might have trained your son to get into the mining industry, but let's give your daughter a job mining the copper and the aluminum, the steel that we need to build this other clean infrastructure instead of fossil fuels. So we got to, stop training the next generation and taper off at that speed. And that is commensurate with beating a 2-degree target and actually going close to 1.5. As long as we make sure that every single Australian, the next time they're buying a car or a water heater or a kitchen appliance or the space heater for their house, that they have the financing options, they have there's enough tradies in their postcode that can actually get the job done. And we've got to make it the easy choice so that Australians can opt in to solving climate change in their daily lives in a way that isn't incapacitating, because it has felt incapacitating until now.
Yeah. The next question I've got is from John Knight, and I might address this one to you, Minister D'Ambrosio. He says, by world standards, Australian buildings, even modern ones, are designed to use as much energy as possible. And from a performance perspective, they're quite woeful. And he wants to know, is that a roadblock to implementing, this electrifying everything vision and some of the programs that you've outlined for households in Victoria?
Well, look, there are many barriers, if you like, but there are also many opportunities that we need to unlock. And part of that, for example, in terms of the built form, is to improve the energy efficiency standards of new housing stock in particular. We know that, of course, old housing stock is a significant problem in this country. I think the average is about 2.5 stars when we think about it in those terms. We've committed as a state to introducing a 7-star rating system for the build of new homes. But similarly, energy efficiency means that we actually start to improve the energy efficiency investments that we're making, means that we're actually starting to improve existing build. So this is a big step that has to be taken in Australia. But Victoria's been very loud and proud in terms of pushing for improvements to building standards, absolutely. But we're not going to have a silver bullet that will answer everything, of course, but certainly there are a number of barriers, there are a number of opportunities. We need to be positive in the way that we approach these, and we need to always have an eye to how do we keep costs down, how do we make it easy for people to make the right choices for themselves, at the same time that they're making good choices for our environment. And that's where really good cohesive and well-targeted government policies come in to ensure that we don't have those gaps of people falling through the cracks and are left behind, either in a locational setting or indeed through sheer inability when it comes to their economic ability to be able to come along for the journey.
I notice we've got more than 1,100 or close to 1,100 people on the line with us today and lots of questions. If you could help me out, if there's great questions in there, if you could help upvote them so I can see them, because there's a ton of questions in there. Lily there talked about some of those costs that households face. We've touched a little bit on the equity issues. Saul, I wondered if I could come back to you around home batteries. Ian James has got a question here around home batteries are still way too expensive to be economical for a lot of households, and what can be done to bring the costs down. Can you just talk us through some of the economics there and the reason that you're so optimistic that costs will come down?
I think home batteries are where solar was maybe 10 years ago, and they're installing on Australian household. I'm going to use this to answer two really important questions. And they're installing about $1,200 a kilowatt hour on the side of the house. In my professional life, I purchase the cells and the battery packs at about $120 US per kilowatt hour. So at that price, the cost of storage would be 5 cents a kilowatt hour, which in combination with our solar would be spectacular. So part of that is actually, and Lily brought it up, we need to make sure that the regulatory environment enables the lowest possible costs to be passed on. Right now, we have all sorts of regulatory costs to putting the battery on the side of the house, and it's fire codes and permits, and we have to put bollards if you put them inside the garage. And that's very much like the problem that America has with solar. And why do I say that? Australians enjoy buying solar at under $1 a watt. Americans pay more than $3 a watt. And the difference is certification, permitting, and inspection. Australia did a tremendous thing, either accidentally or through sheer genius, when it did the solar certification and training program, because they killed two birds with one stone. They built capacity of a workforce that could get the job done, but they also allowed that workforce to be the inspector, and we cleared the permitting hazards. And so the soft costs were incredibly cheap. What's dominating the cost of batteries installations right now is the soft costs, not the underlying costs of the battery. So with a similar stroke of the regulatory pen and a similar certification and training program, cleverly designed, and then just the relentless march down of the cost of technology, I think the batteries will yield in the next few years. We'll go with there. That's great.
Yeah, no worries. Richie, this next one might be for you because Matt Keane isn't here. Judith Leslie asks or says the New South Wales roadmap to net zero is commendable, but how can the New South Wales government reconcile that with their own planning department's rapid approval of new coal mines and coal mine extensions in New South Wales? We can't speak for Matt Keane or the government, obviously, but what does Australia Institute research show? I know we've done a fair bit of research into that.
Yeah, we certainly haven't. I won't try and fill in Matt Keane's big shoes, certainly be a poor equivalent. But basically, the 50% emission reduction target set by the New South Wales government is only on the emissions within the borders of New South Wales. And that's part of really the UN Framework Convention accounting on climate, which is that you're only responsible for onshore emissions, even though, say, New South Wales is one of the largest jurisdictions in terms of digging up and exporting thermal coal. And unfortunately, there's still 20 new coal projects in the works in New South Wales. There's new areas being opened up for new exploration for coal in New South Wales. And if we're all in this together, then this is a serious concern. Ultimately, you do have to reconcile these two things, both dealing with your emissions at home, but then also dealing with the emissions that you're supplying the world. To some extent, the second part will be answered in terms of the demand for coal, given that the three largest destinations, China, South Korea, and Japan, are all going to net zero. Eventually, we'll see that demand for thermal coal dry up, But in the meantime, it doesn't seem like the best port of call to increase exports, and certainly the port of Newcastle, being the main port to export call, has taken that on board in actually changing plans for its fourth terminal as well, moving away from coal too. So really, if New South Wales wants to take it that next step, then it should look at revisiting all the permits it is granting out for new coal licenses and new coal mines. That's really what would get to it. And yes, those are my chickens in the background, the joys of working from home.
Thanks, Richie. A lot of love for the chickens in the chat. People might have seen
Ebony, maybe while you find the next question, I remember the second point I wanted to make about batteries.
Sure.
So too much fanfare, the Ford F-150 Lightning was announced by Biden only a few months ago. That's the most produced vehicle of all time. More than 50 million of them have been manufactured, and more than 25 million are still on the road. That's a four-wheel drive that's a little bit bigger than the Ford Ranger that's ubiquitous in Australia. It's going to be $40,000 US. What's that? 50 to 60,000 Australian dollars, and it comes with a 100 kilowatt hour battery in it. So it's like a battery at half the price of batteries today in Australia that comes with a free car attached. And it's really to say that the electrification of vehicles is overwhelmingly important in doing this, because it will form such an important piece of our storage, and it also will drive the cost of batteries down. The WAG way of thinking about it is you should electrify your vintage car, and then your wife or partner will allow you to consider that the backup for your battery. Or perhaps you have a jet ski, you should convert it to an electric jet ski. It'll need a 100 kilowatt hour battery, and that's more than enough to back up your home. Comes with a free jet ski.
Speaking as someone who finds jet skis quite annoying at the beach, the electrification of jet skis, I think, would be a wonderful revolution to see.
It's a win-win-win for climate here.
That's right. And for beachgoers. Lily, there's a lot of questions in here around electric vehicles, and in particular, the Victorian EV tax. I know that program looks a bit different to when it was first proposed. Could you just take us through what Victoria is currently proposing around electric vehicle policy?
Right. Well, look, we announced our first set of initiatives to increase the uptake of ZEVs, and I've just made mention of that earlier. Some of that, it goes towards rebates for the purchase of new ZEVs below a certain value, and including, of course, some additional investments in charging stations, and other technologies related to buses, etc. Now, in terms of the road user charge, that road user charge, and I know that there will be some on the call here on the meeting here that are not happy about it, but the reality is that this is about preparing the new revenue streams that are important for the future as we move away from fossil fuel powered vehicles. And when we strip it all back, we need to understand that with the subsidy, getting that ZEV on the road, you're actually still way ahead in terms of your annual savings by using a ZEV compared to a combustion engine vehicle, including the road user charge. So we're very clear about this. We're already, getting good uptake for our rebates. So we don't believe that it's a dampener at all on the enthusiasm that people are having to get into the market with that subsidy. Now, the ZEV work is only just started, though. This is really important. Myself and the Minister for Transport, Ben Carroll, have established an expert panel to give us that next wave of proposals and initiatives as recommendations by the end of this year, which will take us further down the road of improving the uptake and really moving along that decarbonisation of the vehicle fleet in the country. That's really, really critical, of course. And we believe that there'll be some really big offerings coming down that way through those recommendations. And then, of course, we'll give due regard to those in terms of announcements post that.
So coming back to you on electric vehicles, I'm not sure if it was on 7:30 last night or breakfast this morning, you were talking about the ideal policy being, I think, from Norway. I know the Institute's done a bunch of work on that, but could you take people through kind of what the best practice looks like globally for encouraging EV uptake?
Norway has fabulous hydro resources, and they have a small population, and they've had very proactive rebates on electric vehicles. The reality is an electric vehicle, whether in Norway, California, or Australia, is 1 or 2 cents a kilometre to drive, and a petrol or diesel is 15 to 20. So the governments that can think about it as investing in the citizenry, and then those savings will be realised and spent elsewhere in the economy, that's good policy. So rebating it until we get to cost parity in the car dealership is good policy, given the short timelines we have on climate, and it's only 4 or 5 years out before we hit that very important price parity at the dealership. Anything that encourages the charging network is good. I think if we actually look forward, we do a lot of analysis, very detailed analysis on how people charge their electric vehicles. You would say that today people treat their electric vehicles like they treat their cell phones. They park them on beside the bed and they plug them into the wall to charge them for the following day. That won't be the best behavior because the sun's not up usually. So that's to say we also need policies that encourage charging networks at the places where we work, where we go to school, where we shop, etc. And there's huge opportunities to do the right type of shaping of policy there. But building the market, building the expertise, training people to be in the repair networks is critical. It's all about building capacity, whether that's market capacity or human capacity on maintenance right now.
Richie, we've obviously done a bunch of work at the Institute. Did you have anything to add to that?
Just the one thing that often gets missed is that Australia has no CO2 emission standards for its vehicles, which means that the emissions we're pumping out in our car are pretty much sort of unregulated compared to the majority of the world that have decent standards on the amount of pollution coming out of their tailpipe. Improving that standard, or at least even setting a standard, would go some way to cleaning up Australia's fleet and would also drive more electric vehicle uptake. The other thing that Saul mentioned earlier, whilst Australia is the largest exporter of coal and the largest exporter of liquefied natural gas, it's completely liquid fuel insecure. Over 90% of our liquid fuels, our petrol, diesel, jet fuel, all come from overseas. By electrifying everything, we go from importing almost all the fuel for our cars and vehicles to actually making it in Australia, and most likely making it in regional Australia. So it's just this massive shift in terms of how we operate and the benefits that will accrue if we do that. And that's certainly something that I know the New South Wales government was keen to promote when it rolled out its 50% emission reduction plan last week.
I've got probably a lot of people in England wishing they had electric vehicles at the moment, as they're all lining up for petrol that's run out or can't be shipped anywhere. The last question I've got is from John Denley, and I might put it to all of the panel. We've got about 6 minutes until we have to wrap up, so if you could keep it brief. Minister, I might come to you first. It's a question on how we phase out our domestic gas network, and I just wonder if you could comment on, I know that's kind of a big thing to finish on, but there is a big shift that has to happen here.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's a really pertinent question, and it's really good that it's the last question, because and that's why I've got this gas substitution roadmap underway, because we know that for us to go even further in terms of our ambition to cut our emissions, we need a solution for gas. That is the next big nut to be cracked, the next big problem to be solved in an Australian context. We've solved the power generation. We know, just keep building more renewables with dispatchable capacity. Absolutely. We've got the solutions for those. The gas one is the next big challenge, and that is something that is squarely within our sights. We have to reduce our reliance on gas and eventually get to a point where the reliance is just not there to get to net zero. But the thing is, what do we do with gas between now and 2030? And that's exactly the focus of the roadmap that I've got being developed right now. It's a big challenge for Victoria, but similarly, there are big opportunities, and the next big challenge for our government is to come up with a plan to decarbonise the gas system. And a lot of that will be down to electrification.
Yeah, thank you. Richie, I might come to you next on gas, and then we'll finish up with Saul.
Yeah, I mean, I think the minister is spot on. It is the next major hurdle, and particularly in Victoria, which uses up the majority of residential gas. And really, electrifying everything doesn't mean that we look to replace gas with hydrogen that we pump through our pipelines either. That's just going from one problem to another. We need to just get off gas altogether. And so that's why electrifying everything really just nails that in one go. The other thing to mention is that gas is not a transition fuel either. We're at the stage now, and the IPCC's sixth assessment report makes clear that we can't afford any sort of false solutions. And so really we need to go straight to where we want to end up. And that is just entirely with renewable energies for our electricity and electrifying everything. And that's really a relatively simple narrative to climate change. It's a positive narrative for climate action. And I think it's one that we're very keen to support through Saul's work.
So the last question was on gas, but just to give you the final platform, we're about to finish up here. There's one message you want to leave with everyone. Take it away.
Well, I wrote a book called Electrify. I've been advocating for electrification of everything in multiple continents for multiple years now. And that's for the very real reason that we are not winning this fight because people are still using, poor arguments to cause delay. We'll put hydrogen in the gas network argument. At most, you can put 20% hydrogen in before you run into problems with the metallurgy of the pipes. It's a non-solution, and any investment in that is a dead investment. Biogas. Well, we can and should make biogas and biofuels, but it doesn't scale to meet all of, or even nearly all of our fossil fuels. It's maybe enough to do some of our long distance freight, some of our aviation, and that would be a tremendous investment, and we should be doing those things. But the things that are easy to electrify, that are more economic to electrify, we should, and a lot of those are in the house. And that's to touch on the other issue, the health issue. In the United States, the protocol at the doctor, if a child represents with a respiratory illness, the first question the doctor is told to ask the parent is, do you burn natural gas in the house? And if the answer is yes, it's very, very, very highly associated with respiratory illness and asthma. That issue we're becoming more aware of. So not only should we be doing this for the economics, not only should we be doing this for the planet, we should be doing this for the health of our children. And so, my message is stay on target, stay on focus. We need to electrify everything. We need to electrify our vehicles. We need to electrify our kitchens, and I'm just going to own it because it will be up in the culture wars tomorrow. I saw it in the chat group. How do I electrify my barbecue? Well, I think we should propose a program with Lily in Victoria for the Subsidised Electric Barbecue Act of 2022, where you get a 2 kilowatt-hour induction hot plate. It'll cost the government about $500 a home, and it will take all of those gas barbecues off, make them off limits. Those snags will never taste like fossil fuels again, and we'll be able to actually, use that as dispatchable power to the grid in case of emergency, right? We have the ideas, we have the creativity. We've got to sort of loosen the grip on some things that we hold a little bit too dear and actually realize that there are better solutions and they're right here, right now. And honestly, maybe the message I'd like to leave you all with most of all is there's no community, there's barely a single house in the whole world that has done this where it wasn't expensive or a pain in the ass. Sorry about that, everyone. But that is to say, I think we are best served if we mea culpa. We don't know how to do all of the little bits yet. We all need to get in it together. We need to get in it together as communities, as households, and as nations. And we need to solve these problems. And we need to look creatively. If someone says, well, how am I going to do my barbecue? Well, let's provide them with the answer. Someone's really worried about losing their jet ski. Let's electrify the jet ski. There is nothing but good news stories if we apply enough optimism, enough ingenuity, and the teamwork that is genuinely, this is not going to be solved without a public-private partnership like we've never seen before. The government has to make the regulatory costs go away to keep it in check. And banks and individuals and households have to come to the table to finance it because it's beyond a single government. So working together, electrifying everything, and understanding we don't have all the answers, but we will be able to do this together.
Excellent. Well, to end on that fabulous note, I think is about the right time. So I want to thank everyone, particularly Saul Griffith, Minister Lily D'Ambrosio, and Richie Merzian, as well as Ben Oquist from earlier. We do again send the apologies from Minister Keane that he was unable to join us. I want to thank you all for your amazing questions, and I hope you all found that as inspiring as I did. I know climate can often be very depressing, so it's nice to hear about all the solutions that are available right now and that will also save us a bunch of money.
This has been a special webinar episode of Follow the Money. All our webinars are free and available on the Australia Institute's YouTube channel, which you can find at australiainstitute.tv. All our latest research and content is at our website, australiainstitute.org.au, and we're on Twitter at the Oz Institute with an AUS. My Twitter handle is ebony_Bennett with a NNT, and this episode was produced by Jennifer Macy, and you can find her at Jennifer Macy. Our theme music is by Jonathan McFeet from Pulse and Thrum, with additional music by Blue Dot Sessions. Thank you for listening to Follow the Money, and I hope you're having a great summer.